So in this video, I want to show you guys how to use the Drippy tool to do a rebalance for a crypto to crypto pool. And it depends on your goals and what you want to do with it, but let's run through it really quickly. So let's start with the position setup here. And one of the major pairs that you might be yield farming is ETH to Bitcoin, or you could be doing stuff like Sol to BTC or Sol to ETH. Anything would work just the same, except that some of the numbers might be different. For example, you might be valuing your positions in Sol. And if you do prefer to use Sol for this example, I do recommend using Sol as the quote asset because it's easier to see on the graph. If it moves up, it just means that you are gaining Sol in the process, right? And before we begin, we want to make sure that this is the quote asset mode and you can switch it here. So this is the base asset and this is the quote asset. And just a refresher on the base and quote asset, if I am trying to LP ETH to Bitcoin, ETH would be my base asset and Bitcoin would be my quote asset, right? Meaning that everything is being priced in Bitcoin. If I'm looking at the ETH value in US dollar value, currently ETH is trading at $2,058. Bitcoin is at around 68.3K here. And if you take ETH divided by Bitcoin, it will show this ETH to BTC number here, right? This just means that to buy one ETH, I would need about 0.03017 Bitcoin. If this numbers goes up, it means that ETH is becoming more expensive relative to Bitcoin. So if I unlock this button and move ETH to $4,000, for example, then this number would move up to about 0.045861, right? But that's not what I want to do in this scenario. So I can refresh it really quickly here and reset everything. And let's go to ETH to Bitcoin. And then when I first start the simulation, I need to figure out how much Bitcoin my position is worth. If you don't know that already, you could use this calculator button, right? So if I put in, for example, 10K, then it would be this amount of Bitcoin and I could click save here. But just for the example, I'm going to use one Bitcoin to make all of the numbers more simple. And then the next goal that I want to actually figure out is, do I care more about the US dollar value or do I care more about this ETH to Bitcoin value? And it depends. If you are trying to make a US dollar profit, you might not care that much about the Bitcoin value. So you're not going to be looking at this bottom metric as much. But if you are trying to use the ETH BTC price and you care more about stacking more Bitcoin, then we can kind of ignore the US dollar value. Let's run through the example here. So if I am trying to provide liquidity for ETH to BTC, I can pull up the chart and look at ETH to Bitcoin really quickly. And if I want to prioritize fees, I might set a range of maybe 0.017 here and maybe 0.06 on top or 0.05 if I want to squeeze the range a little bit, right? And based on the historical price action, as long as it's not these sharp movement periods, I'm likely to stay in range for at least 6 to 12 months. And that is completely fine if I prefer to actually prioritize fees. For this example, I'm going to expand it a little bit to around 0.06 and 0.01 on the bottom side. And that is so the numbers is more simple. So 0.01 and then 0.06 on the upside. And I could always hit reset here if I want to reset this simulation price. So in the beginning, if I'm depositing at BTC, it doesn't matter what the price do in the meantime, right? I might be gaining BTC on the upside and then I might be losing BTC on the downside. But if prices do reset to this initial entry, I would gain back my 1 BTC. And if I do care more about the US dollar value, what I could do is I could basically edit this if my deposit time is not the same as where we currently are trading right now, based on the historical price that you guys can pull up on different platforms like Revert. Just go back to the date that you deposited, how much you deposited. You could again calculate using the US dollar value divided by the BTC price on that day, right? So once I key that in, I could actually simulate, okay, if ETH goes to $4,000 and then Bitcoin goes to 120K, what is the ETH BTC price? It would be 0.03333. So that is the actual BTC price. And I am going to be able to see my US dollar profit and loss, right? This is a scenario where I might care more about US dollar profit and loss. And the reason why we built this is because you could simulate different scenarios. Like, let's say ETH only goes up to 3K, but Bitcoin goes up to 120K. You could see that you're technically losing some Bitcoin value here, but it does not matter that much because your goal, again, is to make a US dollar profit, right? So in this scenario, we could kind of ignore ETH to BTC price for the most part, as long as the price divergence is not too big and that you're still staying in range, right? Like for example, if Bitcoin goes all the way to 160K and ETH is at 2K, then you're kind of in the danger zone of where you might be getting out of range. But even a big divergence like that, you can see you're still in range for this type of setup. So that is how you would be simulating the US dollar value. But if we're talking about rebalancing, we actually want to care more about the Bitcoin value because when you're adjusting your range, it's very easy to be doing a bad rebalance and it's really easy to be locking a lot of BTC losses. So I want to start from this same exact position, one Bitcoin. This is my entry and this is the min and max range, right? And let's just say Bitcoin moves to zero point zero 0.02 ETH BTC. This means that again, ETH is losing value against Bitcoin. I am in a Bitcoin loss here. And if I decide to rebalance, I could click this rebalance button. I'll show you the bad type of rebalance first so that you understand what I'm talking about. A lot of people would just, as the prices are going down and maybe getting closer to getting out of range, they would kind of chase the range downwards, right? Maybe adjusting from zero point zero 0.01 to zero point zero 0.005 on the downside. And then from the upside, I could be zero point zero 0.04, just as an example here of a rebalance where I am chasing the range down so that I could stay in range for longer. And this effect would be even worse if I actually wait until the prices get out of range, then I chase the range, then I would incur even more losses, right? But the most important metric here in this simulation is this internal loss locking metric. So if price of ETH BTC actually goes back to 0.0302, what we had initially in position one, right? That's where our initial entry is. So this is actually simulating if prices return to our initial entry, we would actually have about 0.0858 less BTC than what we started out with. And this is really important for pairs like ETH to Bitcoin because sometimes our yield is only like 5 to 10%, right? So it does not really make that much sense to be locking in about 8% of losses. And the reason why we want to care more about the BTC value is because the US dollar value actually does not matter that much in these scenarios, right? The thing that is forcing you to rebalance is the divergence between the price of ETH and Bitcoin. And you could simply take the US dollar value of where you think ETH is going to be divided by the price of where you think Bitcoin is going to be in US dollar value. And that's how you would actually compute this ETH to BTC price, right? And we need to basically focus on the BTC profit and loss because when you're rebalancing, sometimes you are swapping different assets. And because the pool is made of ETH and Bitcoin, the change in relative strength and the relative price between those two assets is what is causing you that profit and loss of BTC and ETH terms, right? And you can see visually here for chasing the range downwards. Of course, if price keeps going down, you can see you are going to be losing less value than your previous position, which is this dotted blue line here, but you are going to be gaining less value, hence this impermanent loss lock number. So you are locking about 8% of impermanent loss in this scenario. And you could simulate, for example, price goes all the way up to 0.04. You only recovered about 0.939 BTC, even though the price is about 30 something percent higher than our initial first entry in position one, right? And then a lot of people, what they're going to do next is rebalance once more, and then let's just say I'm chasing the range upwards to about 0.02 to maybe 0.07. That is the new range I'm basically chasing upwards with. And if prices do drop all the way back to 0.0302 once again, I'm actually locking in a total of almost 20% of impermanent loss. So you can see how you could lose your capital really quickly here and basically give back all of your fees that you've earned or more when you are rebalancing up and down, right? So this is what we want to avoid. And I want to show you how to actually do it properly. So there's a couple ways that you can rebalance. And if this is a scenario where you maybe entered right now and price dropped all the way to zero point zero 0.02 for ETH to Bitcoin, we did talk about the expand and squeeze rebalance, right? And that is actually the best way to rebalance without incurring any internal loss, or you could actually gain money when you're rebalancing. So this is why we built the zero swap rebalance function. And when I click on that, what you're going to notice is this min floor price here. And what floor price is basically the max amount that you should be setting this lower position without actually messing with this composition part. Because if you're trying to put your ETH and Bitcoin into this position and you are setting the range all the way to zero, and then maybe the max range is not moving up, what you're going to be forced to do is maybe you're swapping some ETH for Bitcoin and you will be locking in some losses, right? So just make sure that your min price is above this. And what it's going to do is if I'm trying to move my min price all the way to 0.005 like before, right? It's going to calculate this new max price. And when we are trying to rebalance, we would just withdraw our liquidity and then put these two new values into the DEX that you're choosing to rebalance. You want to make sure that you move down the bottom range and the max range would auto adjust based on the math formula that we have calculated, right? And you can see that the ratio would stay exactly the same. So if I move to position one, this is the asset ratio at this current zero point zero 0.02 simulation price. And because we are rebalancing at this zero point zero 0.02, and because the range we set is proper, there's basically zero swap here, right? So that's why it's called zero swap rebalance. And what you will notice here is if prices do bounce back to our original entry, you would actually gain a little bit of profit, about 2.45% of profit. And you can see the equity curve here. Since you expanded the range, you're going to notice that you're losing value a little bit slower compared to the dashed line, the blue dashed line, and you are gaining value a little bit quicker with a wider range. But the downside for this strategy is that you will be earning less fees as the prices are trading within the range, right? But again, the good thing is you're not locking in any impermanent loss. If anything, you are gaining money when you are doing so. So you're locking in positive impermanent loss, not negative impermanent loss that could cause you to lose capital. And the second benefit is you will be able to stay in range for longer. So let's just say ETH to Bitcoin loses this zero point zero 0.017 support here and drifts all the way to zero point zero 0.01. You could still decide to expand once more and you're still in range at that point in time. Compared to the previous range where you had zero point zero 0.01 or an even more aggressive range, you're going to be out of range in that scenario. And you can see that if I change the simulation price to zero point zero 0.01, I would have about 0.5169 BTC. And you could see the comparison too. So if you skip the rebalance, you would have 0.4764, right? So it is a little bit of an improvement, but the main benefit again is that you're not locking in any impermanent loss, and then you're also able to stay in range for longer. And if I want to simulate prices going to zero point zero 0.03, I could see that it is going to about 1.0216. And then I could hit another rebalance here if I want to. So I can do a rebalance. And then let's just say I want to squeeze back to zero point zero 0.01 to zero point zero 0.06 because I care more about fees rather than cap gains. Then you can see I would be completely fine here, even if prices do kind of bounce in and out of our original entry. I basically got back to my original entry without incurring any losses. And then I could just go about my day, right? And then let's just say prices do go to the upper side of the pool. This is less big of a deal because you're going to be holding more Bitcoin than ETH. And if I want to do a zero swap, what you're going to see is that the new min floor is actually all the way to zero. The reason why is because you are holding more quote asset. So you are able to put much more quote asset on the bottom side. So if prices do retrace, you're going to be able to just retain more BTC if you do the expand and squeeze strategy as the prices are getting near the top of the range, right? So what I could do is actually set the range all the way to zero or very close to zero. I could do that right? It's going to calculate the new max range that would allow you to not swap any rebalance. If you go all the way to zero, there's going to be a slight discrepancy here. I think it's a bug that we still need to fix, but it should be pretty close. And you can see at zero and 0.07046. So you're going to be able to expand the range. And as long as you keep the new max range and not expand this up too much, because if you expand that too much, you would need to actually buy more ETH to pair it into the LP. And again, this is a zero swap rebalance. So we're not actually locking in any negative internal loss. Prices dumps all the way back to 0.0302. We would actually be gaining about 6% net BTC on our position. So you could be choosing to rebalance a little bit when it's getting closer to the upper range. And the reason why, again, is also to stay in range for a little bit longer before getting out of range. And when you do that and price retrace, you could always choose to rebalance back in once again based on what your analysis is at the time and where you think the ranges are going to go. But again, this is a really great way to rebalance positions without any impermanent loss. So let's do another quick example here with sold to ETH. And I could click this default button and then continue. And what I want to do now in this case is to use ETH as the quote asset, right? So I could deposit one ETH just to make the numbers more simple. And this is the current sold to ETH price. And if I pull up the chart here, let's just say I want to set the bottom range to be at 0.02, upper range to be at 0.09. I can do that. So 0.02, 0.09. And if my goal is to rebalance, again, I care more about the ETH value rather than the SOL value. And we do need to reset here to make sure that the prices match. So the scenario where you might consider a rebalance is if prices do keep drifting lower than what you expect, maybe to 0.03, we could trigger a rebalance, right? So sim price 0.03, you can see because we are using ETH as the quote asset, you are going to be losing the ETH value here as SOL is underperforming ETH, right? So SOL is declining in value against ETH. You're down about 18% worth of ETH. And then if I want to do a zero swap rebalance, I can do that. So it's going to be showing me a new min price here at around 0.0096. And so maybe I would just go all the way down to 0.01, right? And this new max range is pretty high because it is, again, auto calculating where you would make zero swap on your capital. And this is allowing us to suffer no impermanent loss, stay in range longer. And this orange dot just shows you where your range used to be. And you can see we would have much more room for the prices to run. And if prices do bounce back, you would actually be locking in about 2.6% worth of profit rather than locking in a loss. And sometimes it does make sense to be locking in a little bit of a loss if the APR is really high, but for a lot of these blue chip pairs, I find that the APR is not that high to be like locking in losses all the time. So this is a strategy that you could be running. And if you do multiple rebalances, you could always check the stats of like, okay, versus skipping the previous rebalance and then versus never rebalance in the first place, right? So that is everything that we could be doing for this particular calculator. Let's say price goes all the way to zero point 0.1, which is really high, and because you have a wider range, you can see that your rebalance is actually much better than the last previous position, which is no rebalance at all, right? And if I choose to rebalance once more, and then maybe I want to do a bidding LP where I put it at zero, and then new max range is maybe 0.15, that is something that I could do. So I would be having a capped upside with this type of LP. But then if prices retrace all the way back to my original entry at 0.0422, you can see that I would have still locked in about like 40% worth of profit, right? And I could simulate that position for you to see. So price goes to 0.0422, you can see that I would have about 1.4 worth of ETH here in this position. And again, it would compare with previous position where we would still have a little bit of profit from like the expand and squeeze rebalance, right? About 2 to 3%. But if we actually did a rebalance to secure our profit, we would have much more profit that we retain if prices do drop all the way back to this 0.0422 mark. So that is something that you could always do as well. And it does compare if you never rebalance at all, you would have 1 ETH, right? Because prices went from 0.0422 and then it went down. You did an expand and squeeze, price went up. You did a bidding LP, and then now price retraced back to your original entry. And that's the whole simulation process here. And again, the reason why we focus mainly on ETH value is because it doesn't matter like where your US dollar value is. When you're actually interacting with these pools, you're actually shifting the ratio between SOL and ETH. And depending on how you shift your ratio, you could either end up with more ETH or less ETH, or kind of break even with those rebalances. If you have any question about how to use this tool, feel free to ask in Discord. I'm always there to help you out. Just make sure that you try to give me the most detail that you can so that I could answer you in that specific scenario, right? So that's it today. Thank you for watching.